So for this month's Dirty Salad Club, we're very, very lucky to have with us Denis Kelly, who's going to be talking about dynamic capabilities for a dynamic world. So an intriguing title. Very, very excited to get into Denis's session. Denis has a wealth of experience in organizations where dynamism and capability are more than required, where there's lots of change happening, operating in a VUCA-G environment. So we're very, very excited for Denis to bring all of his experience here this morning. For anybody here this morning who's new to Dirty Salad Club, I think most people here are, we'll say old timers or familiar faces, but there's a couple of new people here as well. So for any of you, Dirty Salad Club is a group of professionals, and we get together once a month. And we have a session where we use the time to learn about something new or to learn a little bit more about something we're familiar with. But it's a space for us to be vulnerable, to ask questions, to learn from our fellow peers and colleagues. And most people in the Dirty Salad Club tend to be maybe HR professionals, organizational psychologists, executive coaches, talent professionals, learning and development professionals. People are always curious about where the name came from. It's the name of a band that my colleague Alan used to be in, Dirty Salad Club. But the idea is that, look, these sessions are dirty, as in we're talking about things that maybe we wouldn't talk about in front of our clients, but we're in this safe space. The salad refers to the fact that this is healthy. It's good for us to share and to learn. And the club is the fact that we're all in this together, and we tend to be people of a similar professional interests in that. So lots to learn from each other. So without further ado, Denis, I won't take up any more of your time, and I'll hand over to you.
And thank you very much, Tanya, for inviting me to speak, and to everybody attending, welcome. I hope you'll find this session interesting. It's an area of research. My background is half engineer, half HR professional. I started my career as telecoms engineer working in ESB, among other areas. I then kind of halfway through my career kind of transitioned into a more HR, learning development, then organizational change, org design, and ultimately finished up that area working in the whole area of engineering capabilities within that organization. Since then, I've taken up research in TU Dublin, and in my area of research is technical capabilities for the green economy, or sometimes I change it to technical skills or technical capabilities for net zero, depending on who's there. And really that's looking at an industry that's going through huge amounts of change. So I won't be giving you a very heavy academic presentation. From my business background, I've tailored this to be much more business-like. And what I'm really interested to hear is your views on what I'm going to share with you. So is the sound okay from my side? Am I all right? Yeah. Okay.
I can hear you fine, Denis. Yep.
I'm working off the PC. Let me see now if I can get this working. How are we doing here? Whoops. Let me see now. I'm just playing with the screen to get the slides to move. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, we're going fine. Lovely. So what I'm going to touch, I'll just touch briefly on VUCA for anybody who isn't familiar with it, just a little touch on that. Spend a reasonable bit of time on capabilities themselves, on dynamic capabilities. We're looking at building capabilities, and then a little simple workshop series that I've included. Just if you're going to map capabilities with clients or within your own business, how you might go about that. There's a fair few slides tucked in at the back after the Q&A, which I won't be covering in the session because it will go on forever, but I will refer to them as I go through the session. I'll aim to finish in about 20-25 minutes. That should give us about 15 minutes for chat, because I'm really interested in hearing your views on this as well. I'm not saying I have the answer to everything, but most certainly this is one way of looking at it. So to kind of make things interesting, I've asked Tanya to put up a little poll, and hopefully all the banners haven't obliterated it. But once you put it up, you'll see there are 5 choices, I think. One is the key question is, what is your understanding of capabilities? Forget about what I think about it, just what do you think about it? So I'd like you to vote on that. So is it around the abilities and resources to deliver strategy? Is it around organizational skills? Is it around effectiveness of processes? Or is it around people? So, and to be honest, I'll just chat away. What happens in capability is probably all of the above are true, depending on where you look. So very much what lens you wear will very much define what you think. And there's no right or wrong answer, by the way. It's interesting. Okay.
think we'll have a bias, Denis, in this audience towards the people piece, perhaps.
Yeah, and I'd expect that, which is totally spot on. And in fact, yeah, we're going very nicely. Now, I would expect the first one, which is the skills, ability, aptitude, and knowledge of our people, being the preference for this within this group. My preference actually is our organization's abilities, skills, and resources, and I talked through that a bit. Now, there is an interesting piece that Dave Ulrich covers, which is really around human capability, and it is part of it. And I think it doesn't matter how you define it, as long as you're clear what you mean by it. So it's interesting again, and it also has a very strong linkage into strategy. So I think all of the boxes are ticked, and more certainly could be seen as popular, depending on how you look at it. That's fine, Tanya. We'll pop that down. So I know I suspect I'm coming at it from the right angle. See if I can. Maybe I can kill it. Yeah, perfect. So now I'm just trying to get the slide. Here we go. So when we look then at VUCA, right? VUCA is the definition of a very volatile environment. It talks about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It came out in the 70s, and I think was adopted by the US military sometime later in the 70s, and they talk a lot about a VUCA environment. But the main things about VUCA environment is it's very dynamic. There's lots changing. It's very hard to plan normally, and you need to scan continuously to see what's going on in the environment. And the important part of that as well is that as you scan in the environment, you need to be pretty decisive. You know, hanging about is not. It's a bit like walking up the down escalator. You need to be going at a certain speed to get ahead. Even walking at a normal pace, you'll go backwards. So it's somewhat like that. Other key aspects of it would be being innovative, taking different ways of doing things. Now, the diagram on the left-hand side comes from a paper, an academic paper. Actually, it's a reasonably digestible one, really. It comes from a guy called Denis and a number of his colleagues, and he took VUCA and broke it down into this grid. And on the bottom axis, it talked about how much do you know about the situation? And on the vertical axis is how well can you predict the results of your actions? Now, this can apply for an individual, it can apply to a team, or it can apply to a whole organization. And what's really interesting about the way this guy looks at it is, look, there's the immediate actions, which are shown here in the light blue. And then there's the long-term view, because in a lot of cases in VUCA, the tendency is to make loads of snap decisions and be reactive, and you're all over the place. But the best way to do it is kind of what I think what he puts across it: stabilize, and then set out your forward plan. So one of the ones, we take a look at the top left-hand corner here, they talk about complexity. So he talks about isolating noise factors in your business model. And he also talks about creating test beds in your organization to test out new options. But the longer term really is starting a corporate venturing. In other words, going out and you say, look, I can't deal with all this. I need help. I need to partner, or what I will call about later, to borrow or bridge to gain access to the capabilities you need. So capabilities are key here, but also as the transition pathways. So there's no point in leaping all over the place. You need to form some form of trajectory, which actually is flexible. So that's the key thing, I think, taking from this. You're in a dynamic environment. You need to make key decisions. Capabilities are part of that. And we'll talk now about capabilities and how dynamic capabilities specifically come into play in this. Okay, Dave Ulrich is I'm a big fan of Dave. He has some really, really interesting ways of thinking when he defines organizational capability, and he also has a human capability definition, which is in the slide deck at the end as an extra slide. But he talks about the organization's capabilities, talk about the resources of the firm, which comes from a guy called Jay Barney, and leads on into capability itself. He talks about culture, business processes, and core competence, which really is the people piece. And this is a really simple model from my point of view, but it captures the essence of capability from the organization's point of view. Another interesting model I came across, and you probably would have seen this yourself, would be Jay Galbraith's org design star, which is again quite a popular model. I think it came out in the 1990s. Amy Cates updated this more relatively recently. I was able to make contact with myself and had just exchanged some of our thinking. But what they added to this is they've added capabilities up in the top of the star and display strategy upwards. So really what they call capabilities, what muscles do we need to build, expand, and be known for, which really goes into the whole field then of competitive advantage. And you can see in a VUCA environment, this needs to be adaptive. This is an org design model. And ultimately, Kate's talks about the whole org design leading into culture, performance, and results, while in Dave Ulrich's model, he would say culture is part of the capability, which I would tend to agree with, but you can look at it either way. They're both equally valid. But it's an interesting way of looking firstly at the capability model and now looking at how that blends into your organization. Most importantly, how it links back to strategy. So you remember in the earlier questions we looked at, is it people, is it organization? And we also looked at strategy. So you can see from this model and from Dave's model, both and any of those three really you could equally make a case for. So what are capabilities? I like to think of capabilities as a bit like a pizza. It's based on resources first. A company has a whole lot of resources. And a guy called Jay Barney talked about the resource-based view. And I won't go into the theory of that much, but by defining resources, they have tangible and intangible resources. So tangible resources would be people, buildings, equipment. It could be materials, transport, whole lot of things. Intangibles would be knowledge. It could be intellectual property. It could be a relationship with key contractors, customer relationships. It's all these intangibles. But when you bring those together, you mix them together and you make up a competency. And ultimately, they then come together to make up a capability. It's like you're building up a pizza. Now, one of the important aspects of resources is the whole VRIN or VRIO. And what they are is they're just a statement that if you want to be really competitive, certain features of your resources need to be and we wrote them down to be clear, is valuable, rare, imitatability, and it also needs to be organized to capture. And what they mean by that is if I build something, a brand new pen, for example, and if everybody can copy that really easily, there's no competitive advantage. But if I have a unique feature in the pen and I have an intellectual property rights on it, that means it's not imitatable. So therefore, is protected, so I have competitive advantage and I can then build my competencies and capabilities behind that. So you can see now within your people, within your resources themselves, the whole different aspects, when they all come together, they set you up to build your capabilities. And we'll touch on capabilities now in a moment. So just so thinking now, we're building this up in layers within the organization. So I did a little kind of version of this for my own local bakery to kind of give an example, because sometimes it can be a bit abstract. So if I look at resources within my bakery, and this is a woman who lives down the village here in Lucan, she doesn't know I've done this, but I will share with her someday, because I often chat with her about this kind of stuff. So she might have, apologies, I flipped screens there. There we go. So she'll have bakers, which is staff, she'll have kitchen equipment, ingredients, she'll also have cash management, but also she has a brand. She also has customer loyalty. She has supplier contracts, and they are the resources that she uses to build her bakery business. But then to run the bakery, she needs certain competencies. The core competencies are one that are really special to her, and the more general competencies are there as well. So if we take some of the core competencies, they would be something over here of core competencies, specialty bread products. That's made up of the bakery methods, the bakers, the equipment, the ingredients, the customer data. So they come together this way, and that is a core competency for her. And ultimately, the capability she have, which is a higher level then, which is retail management, I said kitchen management and customer relationship. And you can see down here, I've built up retail sales management from a mixture of competencies and resources. And finally, the dynamic capabilities, and these are the really important ones for her in particular, because customer taste trends, every time I've gone in there over the last few years, she's changing the business all the time. She's continually assessing what sells, what doesn't sell, how to change the shop. It's not a big footprint, but it's continually looking at customer trends, knows all her customers by name, I would think, because I've been in and out there a lot, as she told me, but this customers come in there and she knows their name straight away. And that's a really nice intimate set of intimacy. In addition, then, she's innovating with new products all the time. Every couple of months, something new comes in. And that kind of continuous scanning is really important to for that business, because there's so much competition. And that's how those capabilities build up. So this top capability, the dynamic one, is what influences all the ones below it. And they build that. But she can only build the upper ones by having the right resources available in her business. So that's how capabilities build up. So I'll just touch very briefly on this. This is more of an information side. So you can break capabilities down into strategic, dynamic, distinctive. The bottom ones I won't touch, but distinctive capabilities are the ones that will work for you today. They're really important. You're really competitive. So in that lady's case, she does bespoke confectionery and cakes, particularly for birthdays and stuff, right? And they're very unique, and that's people go specifically to that shop for that product. You can't get it anywhere else. The dynamic capabilities is our whole scanning of the market, and strategic capabilities is what you're looking for. You win with them today, but you're also going to win with them tomorrow, and they're the one that are fundamental to your business. So this is why dynamic then capabilities are so important, because they help you to tune the strategic ones and the distinctive ones, because they make all the difference into the future. Now, dynamic capabilities, let's talk a little bit more about that. I just popped this diagram in. It comes from a guy called David Denis. He will be the leading thinker in this space, but dynamic breaks down into three main activities. I call it the organizational radar: sensing, looking forward in the market, what's going on. And do you remember we had the VUCA thing at the start? What short-term actions do we need to take? What are the long-term actions I'm going to take under the 4 boxes? Once I have found something, I need to capture it. It's called seizing. I need to capture that opportunity, bring it in, pilot it, test it, make a decision. Is this going to be the future for me or not? And then finally, I need to transform that into a distinctive capability or a strategic capability. I need to mainstream it. So you can develop it out in a pilot, but ultimately it's got to get back into the main business or a new part of your business. So there's 3 key steps within dynamic is really important. And if you're talking about even the smaller businesses, if you're out there sensing and you see loads of stuff, but you haven't got a way of testing that and anticipating how other, say, competitors will respond to you, or how will it impact other products you have in your business. So you might bring in a new pen like this one, and that might displace a whole range of other pens because this is so good. Will you make the margin on it? Have you got the volume on it? So there's a whole review process that goes on within this dynamic capability frame. So this is the one we'll come back when we touch on dynamics again when you look at how we build capabilities. But it's one of the ones that people, I would say, underestimate the importance of, particularly in times of lots of change. Okay, so then I came up with a model, and this goes back, this is reasonably similar to Dave Ulrich's, probably not as nice in the diagramming, but I talk about people, expertise, which overlaps a fair bit with competence, organizational design, which picks up some of the Amy Keith's work, systems, process, tools, and then culture, climate, and leadership. So quite a lot of this model comes from Dave Ulrich, and a little bit comes from Amy Keith's. And within those different classes, then I say, well, what falls into each one? So typically under people, I look at the numbers, the discipline mix, the location, role definitions. I won't go into all of those. Again, on expertise. By expertise, I mean knowledge, I know it. Experience, I've done it. Because people can have lots of knowledge, but if they can't apply it, it's not expertise. So again, we look at the range of that. The organization itself, there's quite a number of different attributes here, like flexibility, linkages and communications, uniqueness, governance, and then coupling. Is it a federal system, or is it a platform model, or hierarchical, or what kind of org model is it? And does that actually link in with the rest of it? System processes and tools are really important because that gives you standardization. It gives you the ability to scale. When we talked again about seizing and transforming, we don't get to transform if we can't scale. And the only way we scale is having systems, tools, and processes to do that. And finally, in culture, climate, and leadership, they're really important for me, most certainly my own experience, any of the research I've done, and you know this yourself, the environment people operate within can be, it's really almost like a good garden with a good fertilizer in the ground. You need that. I particularly like Edgar Schein's model of the lily pond for culture, because it does define the dynamic nature of how that whole environment can work, and the climate can change reasonably quickly and can have a very bad knock-on effect into the culture itself. So these for me are the main attributes then that I would use to define a capability. So you might say, so one thing to observe as well is, as you start in the top right-hand corner here and start actually moving around this C here, the more and more difficult it becomes. So I talked earlier about Vrin and Brio and the importance of uniqueness and being competitive. It's very, very difficult to duplicate somebody's climate, culture, and leadership, or systems and processes. You can buy in people, and I don't mean that in a negative sort of way. You can actually ultimately recruit, you can do different things around the people piece, possibly even the expertise. But once you start going into org design and systems processes and ultimately into culture, it's very, very difficult to duplicate exactly what somebody has. But it's also relatively straightforward, if you know what you're doing, how to build strengths based on all of these. And in the people piece, I would also say culture, climate is part, and leadership is a fundamental part of the whole people management and the culture that people operate within, and set the ground for that. So in a way, thinking about it, if people are focusing very strongly on the top two boxes and not so much in the bottom ones for competitive advantage, it's going to cause problems. It's going to be quite easy to duplicate. You can headhunt people, and they'll walk, and they do all the time in certain industries. So let's talk now about building it a bit. How do I build capability? Well, the first thing is you can build it within your own organization, and that's training, process change, organizational redesign. There's lots of options you could have in that one. Another one is what I call borrow. In other words, you go into a joint venture or a partnership where both companies, or more than one company, put people and other resources into a new satellite business or a new capability to build it. Another one then is to buy. You say, look, I can't do this, particularly with the ordinary and the foundational capabilities. They're not the ones you're going to be competitive in. So you may decide, I'm going to outsource part of that, or I'll buy that in as a service, and I get my people to focus on a different capability suite that are more core to the business. And finally, there's an interesting one called bridging, where you can actually do a mixture. You can build some internally and borrow at the same time, or you can build and buy at the same time. And you will have come across this from talent search. And it works equally well with businesses, business capabilities, that you can build them like this. And looking at the energy business, where I'm doing a lot of my research, there's an awful lot of partnerships going up. I was at listening in a webinar conference yesterday for a couple of hours on floating offshore wind, and practically everybody there, even very large companies, were very much in this space, in the joint venture space. And some of them actually, when you listen to what they're saying, you could see they were bridging. They were building capability, but also partnering simultaneously. So these kind of models are very actively in use for building capabilities. So you can see now, dynamically, if I'm watching what's going on all the time, I know which of these options is the best one to go for a particular capability. So I'm going to ask you a quick question now, because I've been talking for a little while. We're nearly finished. So what I'm going to ask you now, thinking about in your own organization, when you're building capabilities, do you build internally? Is it primarily internally? Do you borrow? Do you do a lot of joint partnerships? Do you buy in? Or do you bridge, or do you use all of the above? Okay, making interesting. Okay, I think we're pretty stable there. We're nearly there. Just watching the top count, just give people a last moment. So it's interesting that all of the above would be the one that I think most companies go for. But in building, the two that were picked with the highest number there, which is build and all of the above, is where I would expect it to fall. Because particularly in the energy sector where I'm working, is you have to do all of the above, because people are bringing different things to the party. and it makes it quite interesting. But internal building is the most common default that most parties go to. And I would say particularly within a dynamic environment where things are changing rapidly, you'd have to question if that is the best option. Particularly if your industry is moving on quickly. If your industry isn't moving on quickly, then internal building and bridging are probably two very effective ways of building it as well. So thanks very much for your votes. Okay, just pop on. Sorry, this is a moment. All right, here we go. So capability mapping. Now, I've provided a more detailed couple of slides in the pack. I've given a PDF of my slides to Tanya and she sent them out to you. But the detail of each workshop is included in those, and we can always talk about it in the Q&A. So the way I suggest, and I've done it myself in capability mapping, is I would start off firstly by saying to people, well, what are the top current capabilities? But even before that is, I make sure we're all on the one page. What do we mean by capability? Is it the human definition? Is it the process definition? Is it the strategy definition? Or the organizational definition? And once we get that, we pick what are the top 6 for us now. And by starting with the now, people are very familiar what it is. And you then go through the workshop using the grid, the 5-box grid, and you fill out what the capabilities are within the organization. And then you tag with those, which of the 4 Bs are you using? Are you using build, borrow, buy, bridge? Which is what are we doing right now? It's also useful at that stage to do any capability gaps you perceive are there today and what are we doing about them. And by focusing the top 6, I wouldn't go above 6 to 10 for this exercise because it just gets too onerous. But maybe later on, people could do a few more. The danger of doing too many is you just end up with vast lists and they're quite unwieldy to deal with, and you will lose focus. So by concentrating on the top ones, if they're working well, the rest should actually come in line with it. So once a workshop 1 is done, I would then move on to workshop 2. And I usually pick about a 5-year strategy. 2 years is just down the road. It's very predictable. The 5-year one really stretches people, and you will find that new capabilities will arrive. Now, I don't expect all the 6 capabilities picked from the first workshop to disappear, nor should they all be the same in 5 years from now, unless you're in a very stable industry. Assuming they're not, and you say it's roughly 50-50, you do the same exercise where you map out the capabilities, and then you say here you look at then what is the change between where we are right now and where we're going to, and decide then how will that gap be bridged using the 4 Bs. Because it's when you look at them, you begin to see, look, we have no capability, say, in floating offshore wind. What can we do? You'd have to break that down, identify what you want, and then focus on that piece, and then decide where the rest is coming from. I think I have one on the next slide. So I did one here on innovative product design. So on the people thing, I just looked at numbers, locations, the role definitions. I just assumed that they'd be using the standard role definitions. Did they want the ability to flex it up and down? Yes. And they want a mix of 75 to 25 between external and internal. So they're obviously borrowing here. In fact, they're bridging. I should have changed that. I also looked at the internals over here. What does the organization look like? It's an internal, external. They're going to have separate project team arrangement. There'll be linkages with the key internal stakeholders will be important. There was most certainly research done by a colleague of mine in Denmark. She was saying that when you bring people out of an organization to set up a new pilot, they find it quite difficult to get back in. And that can be, if you're doing it for over a long period of time, it can be quite tricky. And then under the other ones, there'll be systems and under climate. So I just filled that out. So you'll end up with a box, a grid, something like this. So now you have for a capability, specifically what you need to do, what's needed, and what the gaps are. You can complete that. And then when you're looking at together, how did it come together? Remembering we looked at the Cates model with capabilities. So you have a number of capabilities defined. They're all defined in the same way. So when you stack those up, all the people pieces come together. So you begin to see what's a total people picture, what's a total org design picture, what's a total system picture. There will be some overlap in the different capabilities. There will be certain things that are common and be certain things that are different. But the idea of doing it in this manner is you can stack them up almost like a multi-layered cake, form what underpins your strategy. And because they're all mapped out in the same way with the same methodology, it's quite easy then to compare, say, for example, demand forecasting with new product design. They're quite different, but there's some overlaps. So the org design features might be similar, but the systems, processes, and tools might be quite different. So it means that you're not going out delivering each capability differently. And again, in a dynamic space, you will build dynamic. In fact, new product is, where is it? I haven't got it here, sorry. New product design tends to be a dynamic capability to a degree, to some degree, but I have some other ones later, which I'll show you. So that's the strategy link, really, really important. If you're not focusing your capabilities on your strategy, the question is, what are you doing? So in summary, this is the last slide, and we'll throw over the questions, then we should just about 15 minutes or so. Just remember, like, being in a VUCA world requires dynamic and agile response. You remember the comparison, you're walking up the down escalator. So you've got to be moving reasonably quickly to make pace happen. The capability types is really need to focus on our strategic, dynamic, and distinctive. Distinctive, you win today. Dynamic tells you what you need for the future, and strategic are the ones that are fundamentally going to give you the competitive advantage you need now and into the future. Capability building, remember, it's a layered pizza. It's all about taking resources like Lego, putting them into different sequences to make up different capabilities. And the dynamic capability is your organizational radar. You'll have the long range stuff and the more immediate stuff. So you have sensing, seizing, and then ultimately transforming that so into different areas. Capabilities that I'm suggesting is made up of people, expertise, your org design, system, process, tools, culture, climate, and leadership. Very similar to Dave Ulrich's model, but also taking on board some of Galbraith's and Amy Keith's work. The thing to keep in mind as well, your capability definition will be company specific. It's not going, there's not a generic, here is innovation management, there's a capability. There's no generic for it, because it depends very much on your organization, what you're doing. Remembering then the 4 Bs, build, borrow, buy, and bridge. And then finally, there's a mapping process where you can then stack your capabilities up to give you the total picture of those top 6 to 10 that you're really going to work on to give you the competitive advantage you need. So the good news is, over to you. My contact email, by the way, is there. I left it on the slide just so you can see if you want to email me or whatever. So look, I've been talking a lot, so I'll just throw it open to questions. I hope I haven't boggled out everybody. So you guys far away, please feel free to ask a question, or comments or observations will also be very welcome.
Denis, thanks a million. I mean, it's always good, and we'll all agree, it's always good to have a new framework or a new lens to look at, through which to look at something. There's some great pieces there. I think maybe even for all of us, even in our own organizations, even if they're small organizations, as any individual practitioners there, there's things for all of us to take from that. And I know I'm very much looking forward to having a look at that mapping process and the workshop as well. How about anybody else?
Billy had his hand up there somewhere, I think.
Good to see you, Denis. How are you doing?
Good to see you, Billy. I'm great, thanks.
Then it just occurred to me that I missed the beginning. Unfortunately, I had a problem with my Zoom login today, but I did get most of it. It occurred to me, Denis, I wondered any view on this about being kind of iterative as well, because just thinking about in building, we just say take the utilities and engineering capability, and then that you might decide the way we're going to address that is through joint venture.
Yes.
But that in itself then means that you've got to build the capability, legal, financial. And they have to then decide, do we go build a bridge or borrow or whatever? So it's almost an initiative piece, isn't it?
It very much so. Actually, it's a really good question, because what in effect is when you're building your capabilities, it's a dynamic capability in its own right. Because if you're in a world, particularly say, you're saying, Billy, you're getting into a world where if you get into joint ventures, whatever, that generally tends to suggest, I haven't got the capacity, as in people, I haven't got the expertise. My organization structure just isn't right for this. I haven't system, process, or tools, or maybe it's a culture thing. It just doesn't fit. And being able to do that iteratively is important. And if you go for the buy model, You can't just throw it out the door. You have to be able to manage that in some way. And it creates, so it's funny, if you're getting into any sector, there's no free lunch is how I describe it. You need a capability to play. Now, if you decide to outsource, that's a different capability. But if you're going to insource, that's a bigger capability. So you're absolutely right. So it is iterative. And that's why I'm saying, in a way, it's good to start with what are the really, really important ones for the strategy. If you're not aligned around that, where we want to get to, whether you could be a non-profit or you could be a profit organization, where's the end game and what's going to get me there?
Great. Thanks, Denis.
Anybody else, any curiosities, questions, comments they'd like to share?
If I may make a comment, I apologize, I didn't see if there was a method of putting your hands up, so I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. But I know Denis through TU Dublin, so I have to admit I'm not a HR professional, so I'm kind of a blow-in to this esteemed community, but still very interested in, my background is in engineering and in energy, and so it's very much immersed in this process of organizational change, and have previously been involved through the whole revolution in manufacturing and the revolutions in energy, and have seen how changes in the environment have demanded changes in organizations and how they respond. One of the things I found very interesting was Denis's original question about, organizational capabilities, and, the answer that of you being human, because it seems, in any modern organization, it's a combination of man and machine. And by machine, I don't mean just, the fancy piece of equipment, although it could be, a baker with the state-of-the-art oven delivers more than the baker with and in so many industries now, it's the technology and the machinery. But technology is not just awful machinery, it can be processes, so for example, somebody with a certain skill set working in McDonald's, because McDonald's has this incredible process developed, they can produce more output of a higher quality than the same skill set in a different environment. And I think increasingly in the modern world, we've seen advances in technology. Obviously, in the last few months, everyone's been talking about large language models and artificial intelligence. And really, the world we're looking to, I think, we need to look at, it's the human plus the technology and how to maximize that, and clearly, obviously, that requires huge requirements for human training and working with it. But almost, I think we need to focus on the combination as opposed to just individual. I think we look too closely just at the human element, we miss a large part of the bigger picture. So that's just as possibly an outsider's view, but it certainly seems to me the reality of the world we face.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Yeah, I totally agree. It is very much a mix of all of those. And I think I was listening this morning on the radio, and there was that similar point was made around the, it's bringing all these new things together in different ways that actually make things happen more effectively. Now, there's two people coming up. Fionn has his hand up, and also Deacon asked me a hard question. So what I'm going to do is Dan, I will answer the question. So I'm going to ask Fionn to ask his question. Hopefully it won't be as hard as Dan's question. And it'll give me a moment to reflect. Sorry, Fionn. Thank you. Good to see you this morning. Thanks for coming along.
Hi, Denis. Hi, everyone. I'm one of the new faces here. I'm a researcher in UCC, and I know Denis through kind of shared interest in energy innovation, thanks, Denis. Very interesting. My question is, looking at Ireland's energy industry, where it is now and where it needs to be over the next decade and 30 years to kind of decarbonize, really. I suppose, how well do you think they're doing with the kind of dynamic capability reorganization, kind of reskilling that you're proposing, because the method you've outlined here is kind of very impressive and kind of would surely be very fruitful and productive. But I suppose, just from your knowledge of the industry, how well are they engaging with this? Do they have their head in the sand? Are they doing a different version of it? I'd just be curious on your
it's a really interesting question, Fionn. Thank you. I was listening to a webinar yesterday run by publication called Recharge, and they were looking at floating offshore wind. And I won't, for the HR people, don't worry, I'm not getting into big, deep technical here, right? And what they were talking about is all the partnerships. And what came across to me from all the discussions was loads of islands working together, but not getting really reconnected. And I know within the Irish context, there's this fine piece of work done on the skills and experience, skills needed in the energy sector. There's a good report, and I think a colleague of Kevin's from TU Dublin was heavily involved in, Una Began was heavily involved in the production of that with the department, and it was quite good. And that's a nice little piece over here. I know you've done a lot of good work on modeling, Fionn, and others. But what I don't see happening, and I think it's being called out a few times in the sector, is the lack of a joined up thinking. And there are people kind of looking to the department to pull that together. And I think at strategic level, to a degree, they are. But a lot of the work we're doing here, particularly the stuff I'm talking about, it really gets down to individual companies and sectors almost getting together. I know Wind Energy Ireland have a fair bit of work done on developing, I would say, competencies, most certainly for the sector. But there's not many people looking at capabilities as such right across the sectors. I haven't seen it done anywhere. I've seen large players influencing others to toe the line with them, but capability tends to be much more organizationally based than sector based, but it needs to come together. So for a good example maybe to use would be, if you take Apple, for example, on the iPhone, Apple work very closely with a number of critical suppliers, right, including Taiwan Semiconductor and another company called, they make the machines for putting etching onto wafers, and another company in Europe who make photolithography. But these companies are all interlinked. And what they do is they realize, if I'm on a brand new microchip out in 18 months time, they back plan and they work together to build those capabilities, because to build the final product, someone else needs to start work on their piece maybe 18 months before, and that all links together. But that's because they have long-term relationships. So if you look at their capability, in the case of Apple, it would be supply chain. In the case of Zeiss, it might be technology, because they would do the lenses for these photolithography machines. And Taiwan Semiconductor would be a mixture of technology and supply chain as well. So again, it's not, ASML, I saw the thing about, that's correct, that's the company. Kevin, thanks. So there's an awful lot of parties in those kind of ones, but that's because an industry gets together. It hasn't really happened in the energy sector. I think one of the big issues there is they're competing with each other. So they may not do that. In partnerships, I would expect it to happen. But in energy, it's something I've thought about a bit, and I'd struggle to see it happening. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, thank you. Very interesting. Yeah, no, that tension dynamic between competitiveness and collaboration is an interesting one.
It's tricky, yeah. I might throw that point out to Billy in a minute, just to give you a pre-warning, Billy, for an observation, which you'd have worked on both sides. Just to go back to Dan then, is culture a capability? That's a really interesting question. I've never been asked that question before. I would see culture myself as a contributor to capability. It's a bit like, it's almost a fertilizer that you grow it in. And if you set up the right culture around it, around the resourcing and the other features and the people, it allows them to work an awful lot more effectively, and it helps you to create a capability. I hope that that covers it. If anybody else like to pitch in on that, please do, on the culture question. Do you want to comment on the industry thing, Billy? On can capabilities expand beyond a company into the broader environment?
Yeah, I'd say, well, it's just a thought is that it tends to happen organically, where you've got, that's what I like to Silicon Valley, where people are moving between different sectors, and you know, we have a hub, you know, looking for innovation, but you know, and you can see in certain areas with certain types of industries, it happens because people move between. I even see it a bit in the food sector. Like someone is working with Kerry today, they're in Glanbia. In 2 years' time, they're in somewhere else after that. And that capability is actually moving around. So that's happening organically. Even though there's competition there. And the same you say with banking. I mean, people move, they're in Goldman Sachs, the next they're in JP Morgan, next thing they're in Citi, whatever it is. So they move. So there's a lot of that happening at one level. But you're right. I think energy is probably quite a challenge because it isn't maybe as singular as something like, I think it may be banking or something. So I think it depends, but certainly I think we've already seen examples. And you say you could take like Silicon Valley as like you put enough people with brains in geographically spaced area, and that capability organically grows, and people bounce the ideas off each other as well. So all of that happens. So that's just top of the head stuff, Denis.
Cool.
Folks, I'm mindful of time here. We're almost time to wrap up. Kevin, I see you have your hand up. Is there a final point you'd like to make?
Look, I've seen others. I've spoken already, but well, just quickly, I suppose an example. The data center industry, 15 years ago, energy was almost a trade secret for them because energy cost is a huge factor for data centers. They use as much electricity as a small town. And over the few years, I saw sharing of information. Now, it possibly is because their main value added is not energy. It was simply a cost factor. But now there's a much more openness in how do you share energy? How do you sustainably? Whereas 15 years ago, it was like prized secrets as to how we ran our servers a little bit cooler than somebody else, and nobody would tell you what temperature or what air conditioning they used. But I did see that gradually that industry became a more sharing, and I mean, I'm sure there are still trade secrets, but it's definitely a different environment.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. And to Tanya, look, I have a fine word for myself. Thank you very much for joining me. If my email is deniskellyres@gmail.com. If you want to give me a shout, have a chat, arrange a meeting, whatever, please feel free to do so. I'm really interested in your feedback and any ideas. So Tanya, I'll hand back to you. I think Alan has hand up as well there. So I'll hand back to yourself.
I think Alan's just giving you a bull of bus there, Denis.
Oh, that's great. Even better. Even better. Thanks very much, Alan.
So Denis, thank you so much again. That was really, really great. Really interesting stuff, I think, and lots of different lenses and different angles for people on the call today. So next month we have Liesl. Liesl's here with us. Liesl, you might like to say a word or two about your session yourself, if you like. So next month we're up on the 24th of May. And Liesl's going to be sharing some research with us around neuroscience. Liesl, do you want to say a quick word or two?
Yes, thank you so much, Tanya. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Denis. This is really interesting, a different perspective to what I'm used to. So I really learned a lot today. Yes, I will be talking about neuroscience for leadership and coaching in the next session. Really hope that many of you can join, and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Liesl. Absolutely. I think we'll have a big audience for that one. Lots of stuff there of interest. So really, really looking forward to that. And I'll be sharing a link and access and ability to register for Liesl's session shortly over the next couple of days. So folks, thanks so much to everybody. Please stay in touch on the Dirty Salad Club LinkedIn page. So the slides and recording of today's session, the PDF that Denis mentioned, will be all up there for you, so we can all have a go at the workshop and the mapping exercises, and we'll all let Denis know how we get on with that. So thanks so much, folks. Really hope you enjoyed the session, and we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible next month or in future sessions.
Thanks very much, Tanya. Have a nice day. See
Thanks,
you, everybody. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Denis. Bye.